A little bit about my background. So I've been there about 1.5 years. Before that, I worked at National Geographic Magazine for about 2.5 years, making maps there. And before that, I did my undergrad and grad degree in geography and Spanish at the University of Oregon. And now I'm here in DC. Yeah, go Ducks. So much for that. Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a project we published last year on the 1968 riots in DC. Next slide. So for those of you who may not be familiar, so the riots that took place in 1968 happened after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And for the 50th anniversary of this last year, the Post started a big project to look at where the riots were happening, what happened, and just to see what was going on in the city during that time. So next slide. So to start our research, and I should say for this project, I work primarily with my 2 coworkers, Armand Amanjame and Danielle Rindler. So when I reference we, that's kind of our main group. And then there were a group of writers, photo editors, and editors as well that worked on this. And so, so for this project, what we did is, of course they didn't have shapefiles and stuff from 1968, so we had to go to Archival Maps. So we used a lot of resources from the DC Library, also the Library of Congress. Next slide. And we found a lot of really great maps, and these maps by the DC Planning Commission on what buildings were damaged during the riots in 3 major neighborhoods in DC. Some of them you may know, the 14th Street Corridor, Shaw, and H Street, areas that are very different now than they were then. And so we took these old maps and we had to digitize the data. And so what we had to do is, and this is what we called it the Post, is we call it, next slide, embrace the trace. That's our fancy way of saying georeference and digitize, but it makes it sound, flashy and stuff, so, embrace the trace. I did this presentation in Spanish last year too, and for those who speak Spanish, the translation is abraza la traza. That's the rough translation of it. But so if you go to next slide. So what I did for digitizing, so normally I would do georeferencing and digitizing in QGIS or ArcGIS. For this project, what I ended up using was Map Publisher because since the images didn't need to be distorted too much, and I kind of wanted to stay in the Adobe Illustrator software, I just stuck with that, which made it really easy, and then I could go ahead and design the maps from there, and then exported those out from Map Publisher as shapefiles. So a lot of interesting stuff went on with digitizing for this. So next slide. And so for the digital representation of this, we decided to use Mapbox and Mapbox Studio. So thank you, Mapbox, for the great work you do if you're here. Next slide. And so we used Mapbox because this would allow us to pan and zoom around different parts of DC. And I have to say, this was my first time working at Mapbox Studio. It was great. It was great to kind of design stuff, and we wanted to go for a look with the maps so it was representative of the 1960s cartography style. Next slide. And so I can post these slides online on Twitter later, but this is the link to the full project. There's videos, there's story, a lot of archival photos as well. Next slide. And this is a GIF of some of the maps in the project. So this is using the Mapbox base, and my coworker Armand animated these Secret Service reports over time on this to show how things kind of escalated over time over the course of a couple days in DC. Next slide. And these dots, these came from, and all of this data except for the Secret Service data, this stuff for the damaged buildings, these were digitized points from those archival maps that we found with the DC Library. Next slide. And then this is what we did with the actual building footprints that we traced, was we put these in Mapbox as well. Next slide. And Armand also wrote a great write-up for the Mapbox website, so if you guys want to know more about the coding and the Mapbox stuff, you can visit that link. Next slide. And so the last thing we had to do is they also wanted this for print as well, so we went through a lot of different kind of versions. How do we take this big online pan and zoom project and make it for print? So you can see we went through a lot of drafts. Next slide. Okay, and so this was the layout we kind of ended with. So one thing to note here is before we got into any of the design work, we just took screenshots from Mapbox and played around with it. So if you're ever just trying to test out design stuff, work with screenshots. It's awesome. And so next slide. And so for the print map, because we had a little bit more more freedom and stuff, just with the design and not, Mapbox has like a lot of great tools, but we could use Illustrator and Photoshop to our advantage with this. We wanted to mirror these old 1950s, 1960s styles maps. So this was one of the maps we used for inspiration. Next slide. And this was another one that we used that actually has those digitized building points. And then next slide. And this was the final map that we came up with. So this was the one that ended up printing, and as you can see, it kind of matches those 1960s style. We have the Secret Service timeline up top, and the digitized buildings below. Next slide. And then there's a close-up of the bar chart. Next slide. More close-ups, so we have these little insets of the different neighborhoods that you guys may know. I think, yeah, we're pretty close to some of them right now. Next slide. Another zoom in of the H Street corridor. Next slide. And then this was one of my favorite parts of this was the north arrow. So I was kind of trying to figure out ways to really match this 1960s style. So on the left is the one from the 1960s map, and on the right is the one we ended up using in print. So that was a fun little touch that was fun to include. Next slide. And then there's the final one again. Next. And then there's the final print one that printed last April. Yes, last April. Next slide. And that's it. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Any questions? I see one right there. Lisa?
Hi. I was just wondering, how long did you guys have to debate about the orientation of your map before you settled on having north and not go south?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. So we actually rotated the map, and this was a shorter presentation of a longer one I did at Macy's last year, but we actually ended up rotating the map because a lot of the maps in that time period were rotated. So as you saw from my map examples, we were kind of trying to match that style. But there were a couple versions where we didn't have it rotated because it is disorienting to some people, but we wanted to keep true to that style that we were matching. Yeah.
One more question? Anybody? All right. Oh, wait.
Oh.
There.
How long did this take in total? You might have said it and I missed it. But.
Yeah, so at the post we work on a bit faster timeline. So the digital one from like draft process to when it published was probably a month. And then once the print one was published, we had about like 2 days to make the print one. So yeah, I mean we already had all the data and stuff, but from building the file from zero to send to the printer, it was like 2 days. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Round of applause.